Welcome to LollieTasking with ADHD. I am your host, Dr. Lollity, a multi-passionate mom of three, a physician, and an ADHD life coach because, like most of you amazing women listening, I have ADHD. Join me as we chat about how ADHD affects our lives and learn strategies to help us all thrive, not just survive, with ADHD so we can live the life we want while accomplishing all our goals. Let's get started. Welcome to LollieTasking with ADHD. Again, I am Dr. Lollity, a physician and trained ADHD life coach for easily distracted women who are so tired of being busy and ready to be more productive so they can accomplish all their goals with ease. So before we get started today, I want to give a shout out to Emily. Emily said, "Thank you so much, Dr. Lola. I am listening and catching up on all the episodes. I love your podcast. Keep up the amazing work to help us with our executive function." Thank you so much, Emily. I do this podcast for women like you who are amazing and try to be the best that they are and can be and getting themselves to their you 2.0. So I'm sure you're working on your Emily 2.0, and I'll talk a little bit about this towards the end of the episode. So today we are going to talk about grieving your ADHD diagnosis. Before we even get into that, you may ask, what is grief? Or what does it mean when people are grieving? Again, grief is different from bereavement. Bereavement has to do with the loss of someone, like someone dying in your life, right? But grief can be any kind of loss that you have. So according to the Dictionary of Psychology from the American Psychology Association, they diagnose they define grief as the anguish experienced after significant loss, usually the death of a beloved person. However, I put that in there. Grief is often distinguished from bereavement and mourning, like I said. Not all bereavement results in a strong grief response, and not all grief is given public expression. Grief often includes psychological distress, separation anxiety, confusion, yearning, obsessive dwelling on the past, and apprehension about the future. Intense grief can intense grief can become life-threatening through disruption of the immune system, self-neglect, and suicidal thoughts. Grief may also take the form of regret for something lost, remorse for something done, or sorrow for a mishap to oneself. Can we just sit on that last sentence? Grief may also take the form of regret for something lost, remorse for something done, and in our case, maybe not done, right? Or sorrow for a mishap to oneself. Does this not remind you of what you experience when we talk about ADHD? A lot of us feel like we lost a part of our life or um, situation that's happened that may not have happened if we didn't have our ADHD. Okay, so grief can be talked about in different ways, but I want to go back to like basics and I want to use something called the Kubler-Ross stages of grief. So, this was something that was taught to me back in medical school when we were learning how to deal with patients who've either had a loss or maybe they themselves have been diagnosed with, like, a terminal illness. So the Kubler-Ross stages of grief is denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So denial is like basically like, oh my gosh, no, no, they're not dead. They're just sleeping. Like, what are you talking about? I just saw them 5 minutes ago. Like, are you crazy? Anger, like, oh my gosh, why did you leave us? Bargaining, right? No, there has to be a better explanation for this. Depression, I almost say depression as the beginning of acceptance, right? Because for you to be depressed, you've accepted that maybe you may not see that person again. But instead of focusing on the light, you're focusing on the fact that you may never see them again. Um, as opposed to, this person did come to this world and had a great purpose for this world, and then acceptance, accepting that, maybe you will see them in the future, in the afterlife or whatever, accepting that yes, they're not here anymore, but it's going to be okay, like life will be okay, right? It won't be the same, but it will be okay. So I took the Kubler-Ross stages of grief, and I basically created what I call the LollieTasking stages of grief for ADHD. And why did I do that? Because I felt like in me having my diagnosis of ADHD, I kind of went through a little bit of this. Um, in exception of like one or two things that I'm gonna add. So while Kubler-Ross has 5 stages, the LollieTasking stages of grief have 7 stages. Okay, so our first stage, just like Kubler-Ross, is denial. Usually I have a little bit of alliteration or wordplay, but it's okay. This will do. uh, of denial. So the denial, you're shocked. So for me, when I heard about the diagnosis, or when they said, "Oh, I think you might have ADHD. I think you could go get tested," my initial knee jerk is, no, I don't have ADHD. How dare you? Um, you're shocked, you're annoyed. And even after I went to go see the neuropsychologist, I still didn't believe it. I actually got a stimulant, believe it or not, to prove that the neuropsychologist was wrong. Okay. Even though I had one of the most objective diagnoses that people could have when being diagnosed with ADHD, a lot of times with ADHD, just your symptoms alone, a lot of people can know that, okay, so based on all this, you checked like 90% of the symptoms, so you probably have it. But with me, I wanted something definitive because I came in with a lot of, not a little bit, a lot of skepticism that I had ADHD. And talking to my neuropsychologist that tested me of what, over 12, 15 years ago now, um, it put me through a different series of tests. And even after that, I'm a woman who believes in science, and I need an experiment, right? So if your diagnosis is right, then I should be able to take a stimulant, and that should help me. Thankfully, this helped, but the problem with that premise, and I don't want you guys doing that, is because not all stimulants work the same way for everybody, right? Some stimulants work for some people and some don't at all. Non-stimulant works for some people, so it just depends on the type of ADHD that you have. I was, however, lucky that a stimulant helped me in this case, right? So I was like, even though the test was very objective, I told myself that the test was stupid and it was long. And of course, anybody who is tired and who has worked all day and then went and take a test, well, it wasn't all day, I actually took the day off. But anyone who's gone and take a test will have the same result that I had, right? Like, I just did not want to believe it. So I took the stimulants. And it wasn't until I got my test score and I saw the big jump, right? It wasn't like I studied more. It wasn't like, I did other things. The only difference, because I tried to control the situation. Like I studied it with the same amount of hours. I studied the type of books I would study. Like I tried to keep everything the same, right? And the only difference was the fact that now I was taking stimulants. And guess what? I did very well on my test, right? So that was when I was feeling like, oh my gosh, I have it, right? But even though I was diagnosed and I accepted it, okay, maybe that, okay, it's focus. I may have a focus problem, but I don't think I accepted the fact that ADHD is in all aspect of your lives, not just where you're taking tests, right? And unfortunately, a lot of people stay in this denial form for years. Mine was almost 10 years that, oh, shoot, over 10 years that I stayed in this denial form, right? And it's hard to break people out of the denial form because I didn't even talk about it to anybody. I just kept doing my things and I kept using the strategies that I had in place, right? Because even people who don't have ADHD have used this strategy. So why? Because I'm using strategies that I have ADHD. Okay. Then the next step is usually elation. Okay. Elation, however, does not start until you start realigning yourself with your diagnosis or re-evaluating your diagnosis. So in my case, after so many years, I was somewhere and they just happened to be talking about ADHD. And even though as a physician, I knew like the, concrete diagnosis of ADHD, there were little things, right? Little subtle things that people with ADHD do or did or always do, I should say, that I just did not realize that was my ADHD. Just little stuff. And in hearing these people talk, it was almost like a validation, right? Like, oh my gosh, I have ADHD. Of course you have ADHD. You were diagnosed. Like, what's wrong with you, right? Right? But you accept your diagnosis, right? In this elation stage, you accept your diagnosis. And when you start learning about it, you're like, oh my gosh, that is me. Life makes sense now. Oh my gosh. And then you go into hyper focus mode. So just start reading everything about ADHD. You go to attitude.com, you start learning about stuff. You're like, oh my gosh, I need to do this, I need to do that. Oh my gosh, I used to do that. It's a oh my gosh moment, a whole series of oh my gosh, right? So that's your elation state. In this state, however, you accept your ADHD, but I don't think we technically accept ourselves. What does that mean? So you accept that, okay, maybe I do have the ADHD diagnosis, right? But uh, I don't know if I'm accepting me as a whole. And what does accepting you as a whole looks like? I'll talk about it more in the acceptance stand. Is accepting that you have ADHD and also accepting that you may have to do something about it, right? Kind of putting the two together to mirror each other so you can come out as a you 2.0 or the better version of yourself, okay? So you learn everything and you realize that, oh my gosh, I'm not broken. I am not broken. There are other people in this world like me, okay? But then here goes then after elation and you finally accept it, then you're like, wait a minute. So are you trying to tell me that if I didn't have ADHD, I could have gotten the scores I needed to get into the best schools that I wanted to get into, right? You start kind of like thinking through things. Are you trying to tell me if I didn't have ADHD, I would have had that emotional outburst that caused the destruction of a friendship I had? Are you trying, like, you start going through all this and then you kind of thinking back at all the stuff that has happened because of your ADHD? You may actually get extreme emotions, right? For me, I felt, why do I have to work so darn hard? Why me, God? Why me? Why did I have to have ADHD? It really affected me a lot. You get frustrated, sometimes anxious, and even shame. The truth is, I felt, who the hell would want to go to a physician who has ADHD? Who the hell wants to go to a physician that has ADHD? Excuse my language, people. So because of that, I actually hid. I started to hide. Okay. So that anger stage again can stay hours, can stay years. It just depends how soon you now get into the bargaining stage. So in you learning about your ADHD and you kind of like hyper focus on everything about ADHD, you then start to look for another reason that maybe you don't have ADHD, right? Even though you've accepted your diagnosis, you start telling yourself, isn't it too old to have ADHD? Isn't everyone a little bit of ADHD? By the way, don't ever say that to people. One of the worst things one can say to anybody. You can't say, isn't everybody a little bit bipolar? Isn't everybody a little bit schizophrenic? No. In you saying that, you minimize all the struggles that they've been through. Okay? So, the fifth stage is depression. In you feeling that sense of like helplessness or hopelessness or whatever we want to call it, you then start to feel like, oh my gosh, I just want to isolate myself. Or like some of us, like I'm the opposite when I'm depressed, actually put things in a box and I forget it and you throw the key away. Like you don't want to touch it. You sit in this feeling of, oh my gosh, life could be so much better if I did not have ADHD. I hate you, God. Why did you give me ADHD? In that depression, however, you start to reach out slowly on your own time now and at your own pace. It may start with you just listen to this podcast where I'll teach you to finally understand your ADHD, you know, and it may even start with you like getting to know a friend who has ADHD and discussing with them. Okay. Looking for your tribe is very important. You need a village around you. Your village may be your doctor, maybe your coach, all those people, your family. Everybody should be there to help you get to the next level and be the better you that you can be. Okay? And in the end of depression, then we start to talk about acceptance. The truth is, in my mind, like I said, I felt, who the hell would go to a physician with ADHD? Or who would hire someone that they know has ADHD? But let's get this straight. While I may not finish my notes within 24 hours like my neurotypical physician friends, I love my patients and I fight for them to get the best care that they can definitely care. I am also an empathetic physician. Those are all characteristics of ADHD. ADHD is a diagnosis of two sides of the coin. Okay? You have heads and you have tail. You cannot have a head without a tail on a coin. You typically should have two sides. So the truth is, our good actually outweighs the bad, or I don't want to call it bad, the negative effects in this current state. However, if you continue to just focus on the bad part, it means that you have not accepted yourself as a whole. You need to be able to accept the negative aspect of our ADHD and the positive aspect. And then you're realizing that the two is what makes the you. In you accepting that, you start to see strategies that may actually work for you. Okay? And this leads me to you 2.0. When you become you 2.0, you have accepted the all of you. You know, you are now empowered to and live a new life and fulfill all what God has asked you to do. You're determined to create a life that works for you. It may look different to everybody else, but it works for you. Some may even begin medication. Some may do medication and coaching. Some may even join a group program like ours. Okay? So if you're like, I hear everything you're saying, and I just don't even know where to start to be the you 2.0, you may join our new program that I'm starting called the Lola Squad. and be part of our village of women that learn together and grow together. We learn about our ADHD and I teach tips and tricks, weekly that will help you with your ADHD. And you also have access to all our courses. Okay? So, again, this is another short episode. It was a little bit slower than usual, but I just wanted you to really understand why it's very, 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 very important we accept our diagnosis, because in you accepting your diagnosis, that's actually what's going to help you be the better version of yourself. Okay? So now I leave you with one of my favorite quotes, which goes, deep grief sometimes is almost like a special location, a coordinate on a map of time. When you are standing in that forest sorrow, you cannot imagine that you could ever find your way to a better place. But if someone, just someone, can assure you that they themselves have stood in that same place and now have moved on, sometimes this will bring you hope, by Elizabeth Gilbert. So I want you to realize that I have been where you've been, okay? And in me being where you've been, you can do it too. So I don't want you to be dismayed, or I don't want you to feel like, oh my gosh, I don't know anything about this diagnosis. Well then, welcome to LollieTasking with ADHD, because that's what we're really going to be talking about. Learning to live with our ADHD, learning to survive with our ADHD, learning to thrive with our ADHD. Different topics that pertain to professional women and entrepreneurs who have ADHD, okay? And that's it for today, guys. Just a quick reminder and summary, because I know we have short-term memory. On today's episode we had an amazing discussion about the LollieTasking 7 stages of ADHD grief. Okay, stage 1 is denial. Step 2 is elation. Step 3 is anger. Step 4 is bargaining. Step 5 is depression. Stage 6 is acceptance. And stage 7 is getting your U 2.0 state. Okay? So, if you could do one thing from this episode, so now you've listened to this episode, every week I want you to not just be hearers of the word, like the good book said, but I want you to be doers of the word. Okay? If you could do one thing, what would that thing be? Are you still in the face of, oh my gosh, why did this happen to me? I want you to know that God had a purpose for your life. I actually had an epiphany. It was a very interesting epiphany where I basically saw two chairs, and I'm just going to summarize it because this is the end of the episode. I don't want us to go over. I saw two chairs. There's one chair outside and there's one chair inside the house. They both look beautiful and they were made for the purpose that they were made for. The chair inside the house was nice and beautiful, but guess what? The only people who sat on the fancy dining table were the family members, maybe during Thanksgiving. A lot of times they actually ate in the kitchen. And then there was a chair outside that had a lot of rain and sun and elements. And if you had to ask the maker of both chairs, he would tell you, I made them for a purpose. One is for inside dining with family, and the other one is for outside, for strangers to come together, right? I made them for strangers who are running and are tired so they can sit down and rest. I made them for the little kid who is playing, for her mom to sit down and watch her play. So would you say the chair inside is better than the chair outside, or the chair outside is better than the chair inside? I would say neither. The chair outside was made strong to withstand all the elements. The chair inside was made to withstand years of sitting and eating, and maybe there's now it's rubber on it. That way the kids don't spill stuff on it. And what God showed me that day is that we were all made for a purpose. And if you believe in the purpose, if you say you believe in God and you believe in the purpose God has made for us, we are where we need to be. Because, and this is what happened to me, right? After my acceptance, I realized that God made me as the chair outside. That way I can show people it is, well, it was hard, right? But it is doable to live a life with ADHD and thrive in that life. And that's why I do what I do. That's why I have LollieTasking with ADHD. That's why I have all these coaching programs I do in addition to my medical practice. So I hope, like I said, you have picked one thing for this episode that you're going to focus on. If the one thing you picked is accepting your ADHD, then the next step should be you getting to your U 2.0, knowing your ADHD, knowing what works and what doesn't work for you. Okay? So that's it, LollieTaskers. I just want to thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I hope you had an amazing listening time, just as I did talking to you guys. Remember, I don't want you being a stranger. If you have any questions or want to talk about this more extensively, you can join us on our Facebook group where we hope to continue this conversation about grieving with our ADHD. Okay? And don't forget to follow us on IG at LollieTasker, and that's LOLLIER. Or email us at hello@lollytasking.com. Please, again, please leave a review so you may just get a shout out on our next or future episode. Till next time, remember, you can do it too. With some planning, a little bit of balance, and a dash of determination. This is LollieTasking with ADHD. Thanks for hanging out with us on another episode of LollieTasking with ADHD. If you like what you've heard today, I would love for you to click the subscribe button, rate, and leave a great review, in addition to sharing with your friends. Your review allows visibility and also allows other amazing women to find this podcast. Also, if you have any questions or topics you would like for us to discuss, please contact me via direct message on Instagram at LollieTasker or email us at hello@lollytasking.com. Till next time, this is LollieTasking with ADHD.